Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching Business Morning on Channels Television, and today we're looking at the Private Companies Conversion and Listing Bill 2013, presently before the National Assembly. That bill seemed to have been generating quite a lot of controversy. Well, here in the studio I have Mr. Kunle Ajabe. He is a commercial lawyer, and from my far left is Mrs. Wumi Oshuntoye. She's the Secretary General, International Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much, gentleman and lady. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you.
Well, I have to start with you, Mr. Ajabe. Talking about this bill, the Private Companies Conversion and Listing Bill 2013, this seemed to be generating, some kind of controversy. Now, as a commercial lawyer, do you think that the sponsors of this bill are on the right path by asking that private companies be compelled to list on the exchange?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Obviously, the question recognizes the fact that the position previously in Nigeria was that companies, particularly private companies, were entirely at liberty to decide when and if they would go public. In other words, the situation up until now, because this is still a bill, let us not forget that.
Okay, that's what the law says.
Yes, it is still a bill, and the position until this bill becomes law will be that a company is entirely at liberty. It takes a decision to go public or not to go public on account of its own circumstances. It is not compelled. What this bill seeks to do, if it becomes law, is that once certain thresholds are met by a private company, it must, and that is the game changer here now, it must go public and it must list its shares. So that is what has generated a lot of controversy, because the operation of this bill, if and when it becomes law, is that it will take away the discretion that private companies have always had to decide that, look, we are comfortable being a private company, we do not want to go public. Now they will not have that discretion anymore. And so if they meet those thresholds, for instance, if their shareholder funds get to a certain amount, or their assets hit a certain amount, or their turnover hits a certain amount, they must go public within 12 months of meeting those thresholds. If failing that, there are penal consequences, there are fines that might be paid. So we are talking about a pretty serious legislation here.
Right. Having looked at the bill, does it affect all private companies, or, few of them? For instance, I know have been clamoring for companies in the telecom industry to list. So I'm wondering, does it affect all private companies?
Yes, it does. It does. The bill, a copy of the bill which I have seen, makes no distinction whatsoever. It speaks in very general terms. So the natural assumption must be that it speaks to all sectors of the economy and not particular sectors like telecoms, oil and gas, or electric power. No, it just says private companies, and that's all. It doesn't make any distinction whatsoever.
All right. Now, Mrs. Wumi Oshuntoye. Yeah. Right. For those arguing that it will help, for those of them for some people who are for this bill, perhaps they argue that it's going to help grow the capital market and, of course, the company itself. Then there's also this other side of it, asking the question, does the NSC really have the absorptive capacity to really cope with this large-scale listing?
Okay. Thank you. I think we need to get things in the proper perspective here. When it comes to making bills of this nature, it is important to have a round table, that you have stakeholders, that you discuss extensively on it. This is a bill that I actually stumbled on. It's not that it's generally made public. You have to scout to get it. That means that you begin to wonder what is the motive of not making this thing, a topic on the front burner for everybody to make their contributions. Yes, there is always a pro and a con to every situation. So in this instance, I think that it's important before we start talking about the benefit here to bring about the organized private sector, to bring about the proposals of this bill, and to bring the press also, because I must
the
comment.
bill has gone through its second reading.
Well, my understanding is that it's at about the second reading stage. I would hope, I cannot speak to how it will go further, but my hope is that because of the controversy it's generated, at least a public hearing, for instance, hopefully will be organized around it. But
so far, no public hearing.
to the best of my knowledge, none. But if I may quickly just make a comment about the absorptive capacity of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Again, we can speak as outsiders, but I don't think whether it can absorb the likely listing of companies or not is so much of a problem per se. I would not worry unduly. Just recently, the biggest Chinese retailer, right, Alibaba, went to the New York Stock Exchange. In other words, it left its own home country and went to list in another country. And there are a couple of Nigerian companies too, big names, who have also listed abroad. They've listed at home here in Nigeria. They've also gone abroad. One has even gone as far as Johannesburg. So there's nothing unusual or as an indictment of our own stock exchange. I don't think so. I think what all of that just illustrates is the fact that, subject to certain regulations, companies should be free to decide how best they wish to govern their affairs, subject to regulations, of course.
Well, I want to believe that those proposing this bill really want Nigerians to actually partake in the ownership of some of these companies, because we find out that some of these foreign companies, I mean, you are from the International Chamber of Commerce. This certainly would have implication for investment.
Definitely.
Yeah, but then they would want Nigerians to actually participate, I mean, be part owners of these companies.
Yeah, territory. I agree with you absolutely. It's a thing that everybody will look forward to say, okay, I'm a part, I have a share in MTN, if they eventually get listed. I have a share in Airtel. But we just must go through the best practices when it comes to, governance, when it comes to corporate social responsibility, when it comes to, governing our businesses. We have a right. In fact, the Investment Promotion Act, there is a section of the Investment Promotion Act that is totally at variance to this discussion. And I think that it's important that when legislators are proposing bills, they should give considerations to existing, bills or laws, so that we are not productive in terms of our regulations. We're talking about foreign direct investment. If I'm looking at this type of proposal scaling through, it certainly will work against foreign direct investment. Nobody would want to put their investment in an environment when they cannot decide, that this is what we want to do with our business. In this instance, they are taking away the governance ability of the owner of the business from them. And much as there are many benefits to it, transparency, openness, corporate governance, I want to make bold to say that if there had not been corporate governance in all these businesses, they wouldn't have grown to that level for you to want to involve yourself in it. So from my own point of view, I would propose that the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the proposers of this bill should, present the Nigerian Stock Exchange as an avenue that, private investors should look into when they are sourcing for funds. And it should be a voluntary thing. Rules pertaining to business, if you want to make progress concerning that, it must be something that will be a voluntary decision for the business owners to say, okay, we want to go to the capital market, just like we talked about the Alibaba. So I think that a lot needs to be done on the part of government, on the part of the organized private sector, to create room for us to discuss more on all of this. For instance, there was a time there was a legislation on arbitration. I mean, a lot of people, the chartered arbitrators, the International Chamber of Commerce, all stakeholders, the Regional Center for Arbitration, we came together to discuss and say this bill is totally against international best practice. And good enough, our government had a listening here. And to date, I think there's a little bit of law concerning that particular bill. So in this particular instance too, those who were talking about loss of revenue to government, the capacity of the Nigerian Stock Exchange and all that, they have a point. Everybody have a point. But it's important to now harmonize our point and see which of these points will be beneficial to the economy. The focus of everybody in this economy should be on getting more people to invest in the economy, not divest, not go to Ghana, not go to Cameroon, not to go to any of the neighboring countries. We need to tread softly.
Mr. Baje, you need to say something.
Yes, I am. First of all, it's helpful to note that by available information, the International Association of Security Regulators Worldwide, the IOSCO, to the best of my knowledge, there is no other country in that 100-member organization where they compel private companies to list. In other words, the best practice.
Not international.
Yes, the international best practice as at today is that it is still a voluntary decision that is taken by private companies. That is one. Secondly, Nigeria has gone out of its way, the federal government, to its credit, has gone out of its way to consistently present the country as being investment friendly, and which is the right thing to do. Anything that would therefore appear to suggest that we are qualifying the entry or the ability of investors to come into this country, or those who are already here to do their business by undermining unwittingly their decision whether to go public or not, is going to give people, is going to make a lot of people quite uncomfortable. Then another thing about throwing up the ownership of these companies to the general public, the fact still remains that the preferred investment vehicle in Nigeria and globally still remain private companies. They are still the vehicle of choice for people who want to set up their own businesses. And it's not going to change overnight. One of the possible consequences of this legislation or this bill, if it becomes law, is that, for instance, some companies may just elect that going public doesn't suit their strategy, and they might decide to go abroad. In other words, Nigeria might lose jobs, might lose wealth in the process. Some, on the other hand, can even go to the extreme length of fiddling with their books just to stay below the threshold. And this is aside the fact that some commentators have said this bill could, in fact, lose the federal government significant amount of tax revenue. So we need to look at it very carefully. The aims of it, the benefits of this legislation or this bill as it is being touted, we need to think it through very carefully, and we need to look at also what are the private sector's views on it. Personally, I would suggest that there shouldn't be any haste in passing this legislation, if at all. We need to think it through because the consequences might just be very grave.
All right, talking about losing, the tax revenue. Of course, I know part of the bill gives an incentive when it comes to the tax issue. Well, we'll talk about that when we come back. We'll just have to take a short break. Well, we'll go on a short break, and when we return, we will continue with this conversation.